This is a true story, based on over 7,000 documents released from the British and Northern Irish National Archives and other primary and secondary sources. More than a dozen documents are still classified until 2067. This is a fully referenced documentary. Whenever you see a symbol like this in the upper left-hand corner, it corresponds to a specific reference you can find in the bibliography section of the end credits. This is in addition to the thousands of declassified documents and historical sources used in making this film. Some visuals in this film were created with the assistance of AI image and video generation tools. This is due to the fact that there is not a detailed visual record for many of the people involved in this story. They are either out of the public eye, in witness protection, or have passed on. Wherever possible, the authentic photos available were provided to the AI as an input starting point to maximize realism and historical accuracy. In the interest of full transparency, each AI-generated visual is flagged with this marker in the upper right-hand corner. This film is dedicated to Gerald Scotti, the DEA agent who resigned in 1983 because of what he felt were illegal actions by the DEA. Among them, hiding exculpatory evidence. He became a key witness for the defense in the John DeLorean entrapment trial, and was the main source of information regarding activities by the DEA and FBI that led to the entrapment of John DeLorean.
My name is John Z. DeLorean. Throughout my life, I saw discrimination, wars, urban riots, and social unrest, yet rose to become a highly successful and respected engineer at General Motors. By 1978, I had left General Motors to pursue developing the sports car of my dreams. It took 3 years, but by 1981 we were mass-producing the DMC-12 in Northern Ireland, through a joint venture with the British government and the Northern Ireland Development Agency, or NIDA. After many production challenges, we finally had thousands of cars being produced at the factory in Dunmurry, Northern Ireland, and selling in the United States. Unfortunately, the cars being produced at the factory were not always the best quality. Once the cars made it to the United States, repair costs to get them ready to sell were substantial. These repairs were performed at quality assurance centers in the US. When I had initially made the decision to build a factory in Northern Ireland in 1978, I had been approached by the Northern Ireland Development Agency offering loans and grants to create jobs and reduce the staggering unemployment there. While the rest of Ireland had become its own nation, Northern Ireland was still under British rule. At the time, the Labour Party government was in power. They manipulated our initial contract with less favorable terms, but they never overtly tried to sabotage our efforts. That all changed with the election of Margaret Thatcher and her Conservative Party government in 1979. When she took over as UK's Prime Minister. Margaret Thatcher had no problem supporting automotive projects in the UK to create jobs and reduce unemployment. Between 1978 and 1982, Thatcher's administration would spend over $1 billion supporting the production of cars in the UK through the car company British Leyland. But Thatcher did not regard the production of DeLoreans in Dunmurry, Northern Ireland the same way at all. Northern Ireland was in the middle of a violent political conflict between Catholics and Protestants. The Irish Republican Army, or IRA, was a separatist group that wanted Northern Ireland to break off from Great Britain and join with the Republic of Ireland. The IRA had the support of many Irish Catholics, who felt they would be better off economically as part of the Republic of Ireland, while most Irish Protestants wanted Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom. The British government had been caught up in the struggle between these two sides for decades, resulting in thousands of casualties on both sides, along with the torture and death of dozens of political prisoners. In the middle of this turmoil, the DMCL project had created thousands of jobs for the Northern Irish people. The Labour government hoped that industrial projects like this would create economic opportunities and ease violence. It also saved the British government over $200 million in unemployment payments it would otherwise have to pay. Despite these positive impacts, Thatcher's incoming administration saw no reason why Northern Irish Catholics, whom she considered troublemakers at best and terrorists at worst, should benefit from any kind of government-supported industry. She needed DMCL to fail, to cripple economic opportunities for the Northern Irish people. Under Thatcher's administration, the Northern Ireland Development Agency chose to violate the terms of their agreement with us. They were not providing DMCL with a 50% grant loan split, as we had initially agreed to, and also not paying out a valid insurance claim after a fire damaged the DMCL facility. This had drowned DMCL in a mountain of debt, costing the company millions each year in interest payments alone. The British government was now in serious breach of their contract and owed DMCL over $94 million. As a result of Thatcher's contract violations, DMCL was on the brink of bankruptcy and had been put into receivership. Since the UK government owned the majority share of DeLorean Motor Cars of Ireland Limited, they seized control of business operations and assigned a receiver, Kenneth Cork. They laid off over half the factory workers, all while claiming they would try to keep the business alive and running.
And the one thing we want to do is to keep it going. And I'm going to the States on Wednesday to see about the distribution out there. And we really do hope we can do something. We want it to go on.
On top of this, I was being told by the British government that unless I came up with a substantial cash infusion soon, the factory would be shut down. Thatcher was also very concerned that I was going to sue the British government for breach of contract. I had threatened to do this several times, and it seemed like a valid strategy at the time. I didn't realize that all it would do is paint a target on my back. While the receivers, Kenneth Cork and his assistant, Paul Schewel, kept up public appearances of trying to keep the DMCL factory open, behind the scenes, Thatcher and her administration had every intention of shutting DMCL down. But they wanted to make sure that after the dust settled, the failure of the company could be blamed entirely on me, not on the Thatcher administration. While I raced to raise money to keep DMCL alive, Margaret Thatcher set into motion an effort to take me out of the picture. She reached out to US President Ronald Reagan during a meeting in London. Reagan agreed to help Thatcher and would assign his personal lawyer, Edwin Meese, to take care of her DeLorean problem. The Thatcher administration and the US State Department would begin exchanging dozens of memos. Thatcher would receive daily reports on how Reagan and the FBI were dealing with her DeLorean problem. This is my story. The unique styling of the DeLorean car was still making headlines in 1982. But behind the scenes, we were facing a huge financial challenge. Due to Thatcher's breach of contract, DMCL was struggling to operate while missing $94 million in working capital. If a solution was not found soon, there would be no more DMC-12s produced, and the remaining factory workers in Dunmurry would lose their jobs. For over 6 months, after the start of the receivership in January 1982, I did everything I could to find investors who were willing to take over DMCL. But one by one, they backed out of any deal that was presented. I was left with only one person who was still suggesting that he had some potential investors. My old neighbor, James Hoffman. What I did not know was that James Hoffman was a criminal, working as a government informant. His goal, and the goal of those he worked for, was not to help me save DMCL. In fact, it was just the opposite. This is the video that most people think of when they hear my name. What they don't know is that the video released to the public was a highly edited version of what actually took place, creatively pieced together by the FBI to make an innocent man look guilty. In actuality, this video was nothing more than a publicity stunt. How can everything people think they know about me be so wrong? You'd have to ask the one man who made it his mission to ruin everything I'd ever built. James Timothy Hoffman.
My name is James Timothy Hoffman. Some people have called me a rat, a snitch, a cheat, a betrayer. Call me what you want. Professional con artist sounds about right. It takes talent to do what I do. I mean, everybody lies. I'm just better at it.
I got my start in the world of organized crime early. See, the mob is a hierarchy. A pyramid. I was smart and determined to move up in the organization.
In 1972, I ratted out my boss to the authorities. He wanted me to be part of a plot
to blackmail Circus Casino in Las Vegas. The blackmailers were asking for $1 million. Otherwise, they would detonate a bomb inside the casino.
I was able to get enough information to the FBI that they were able to arrest the blackmailer.
With my boss out of the way, I was able to move up the ladder. It also helped me realize that I could play both sides of the law to my advantage. In 1976, I got into the business of transporting drugs. I was paid $5,000 to fly a load of cocaine from Ecuador into the United States. That went well, so I agreed to do more drug runs for the mob. I used my family and fake humanitarian efforts as cover. Cocaine? What cocaine? I just brought my wife and kids along on a family vacation to see beautiful Colombia. That trip to Nicaragua? I was on a mercy mission, taking bread to earthquake victims. Over time, the jobs got larger and so did my payday.
By 1979, I had made enough money from the mob to live in a $1 million home in Palma Valley, California.
Just outside of San Diego, and across the street from John DeLorean. Our families became friends. I told Mr. DeLorean that I was in the used airplane business. My son Tom would do motocross racing with DeLorean's son Zachary. For a short while, things were great. Unfortunately, after less than a year at the new place, San Diego police caught up with me. I was arrested and convicted of drug smuggling. The government seized my house in San Diego. Overnight, my family and I had to leave. But I was able to cut a deal with the U.S. government that would keep me out of prison. All I had to do was play both sides again. Keep my mob connections and be an undercover informant for the FBI and DEA. This ended up being even sweeter than I could have imagined. The FBI was paying me big time to keep up appearances that I was still a big player in the San Diego mob scene. I'd set people up, tip off the FBI and DEA, and they'd make their arrest. Well, I got to stay a free man. Officially, I was a confidential informant, or CI. The FBI would keep me on a tight leash by assigning me 2 handlers, agents of the FBI and DEA that I would then pass information to. In 1981, through my underworld contacts, I found out about real estate investors who were working with a United Airlines pilot to fly in drugs. Well, this ended up being a huge bust, with over $15 million of product seized.
In early 1982, my assignment got more complicated.
I was tasked with infiltrating the Hetrick drug organization. William Morgan Hetrick began his career as a pilot for Fletcher Jones, a wealthy pioneer in the computer industry in the early 1970s. After Jones died in a plane crash, Hetrick would leverage his skills as a pilot and move into the drug smuggling business.
He set up Morgan Aviation with 3 of his sons.
This aviation company would serve as a cover for his illegal operations. Hetrick was big time, one of the best at getting large amounts of drugs into the U.S. Hetrick was smart. He hid proceeds from his drug deals in offshore banks, mostly in the Bahamas and the Cayman Islands, which are known as some of the best places to stash money from questionable sources. We're talking millions of dollars in cash. Having his money locked up and untouchable thousands of miles from the U.S. became an increasingly large problem for him. He needed his money in California to pay the payroll of dozens of people that worked under him and to fund his own lifestyle. But getting that money back into the country would be very tricky. If I could set up Hetrick, it would be a big enough bust that the feds would put my family and me into witness protection, and I could retire. In the 1980s, the U.S. Department of State was offering substantial rewards up to $25 million for information leading to the arrest and/or conviction of major narcotics traffickers. I was hoping to get some of this money. The DEA and FBI knew Hetrick was dealing drugs and had been tracking him carefully for several years. But they never had enough evidence to arrest him. The feds also knew Hetrick was keeping millions of dollars in cash in offshore accounts, but due to the laws in the Cayman Islands, Hetrick was still untouchable. To get his money into the U.S., Hetrick needed it to appear that his money was coming from a legitimate source. This illegal process is called money laundering, and it usually involves a bank manager that doesn't mind faking the books if you give him a cut. The feds have been unable to catch Hetrick flying the drugs in, so they figured they might at least be able to catch him when he tried to launder his money at the bank in California. And the best way to do that would be if the feds could pull the strings at that bank. I knew Hetrick, and he knew me. We go way back. Some years ago, I came to see him at his place in Florida and brought him a used airplane that needed repair. Asked him to fix it up and sell it. Thing was, I had already borrowed 10 grand against it. Stuck Hetrick with the repair tab. He didn't like me much after that. For my part, setting this guy up meant a long con. Rebuilding trust with him over several months. Then, once we finally get him to do something illegal, spring the trap. I dropped a few hints with my mob connections, who knew I had drug smuggling experience. I told them I wanted in with the Hetrick drug operation, and I waited to hear back. In any con, there are players and there are marks. Players are in on the scam. They have something to gain from the scam succeeding. Marks are the victims that are not in on it. They are about to lose, and lose big. The first player that made the Entrapment con possible was Kenneth Kidwell. He was the president of Eureka Savings and Loan, a flamboyant and reckless character who was notorious for lending money to the owners of Las Vegas casinos. These were mob-style loans, under the table, and totally illegal.
He was also involved with illegal gun running. One night in California, the police would stop Kidwell for suspected drunk driving. They'd find a huge cache of guns in his car.
loaded with illegal armor-piercing Teflon-coated bullets.
Kidwell cut a deal allowing the FBI to use his bank as a front for undercover entrapment operations.
Kidwell would clear out an office at Eureka Savings and Loan and allow an FBI agent to pretend to work there as a bank vice president. This agent would be the second player in the con, FBI agent Benjamin Tiza. He was my primary contact with the FBI, and he was my FBI handler.
Tiza would operate undercover, posing as James Benedict, a crooked bank manager, helping criminals launder money from illegal activities.
The operation to bring down Hetrick was such a big deal that it was a joint operation between the FBI and the DEA. So we had one more player to round out the team. DEA agent John Valestra. He was my DEA handler. Valestra had the authority when it came to drugs, and Tiza had the authority when it came to money laundering. In my time working with Valestra and Tiza, our goal was to collect enough evidence to make an arrest. But we also needed the evidence to hold up in court and result in a guilty verdict. We needed the convictions to stick, and that made it trickier. Evidence had to be solid, irrefutable. As a result, we had to get more elaborate. Our cons were almost like a film production. We had props, we had sets, we had scripted scenarios. We had secret cameras and microphones hidden to record our conversations on audio and videotapes. And all of it paid for by the federal government.
In March of 1982, police in the small town of Ventura, California, began surveillance of a local resident who was bragging about his money laundering exploits, and a man named Morgan. At the same time, police arrested a woman who had been depositing large sums of questionable money in a bank in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where Hetrick also operated. When Hetrick learned of these incidents, he knew the FBI and DEA were onto him.
He suddenly needed a new method of getting funds into the United States. That's when Hetrick reached out to me. He asked me if I knew someone who could provide money laundering services. This meant creating fictitious books and records to disguise the source of his funds coming from his accounts in the Cayman Islands. I immediately connected him with James Benedict, the crooked banker at Eureka Savings and Loan. Now, it was up to FBI agent Tiza to play the Benedict character correctly and reel Hetrick in. James Benedict had been reaching out to Hetrick for months,
trying to convince him to import several $1 million of cocaine and launder the money through Eureka Savings and Loan.
But Hetrick would not agree to do it. William Morgan Hetrick was just not an easy mark. You could say one thing about working with the feds. They expect results. And the Hetrick trap was not working out. I started getting worried that if I didn't deliver something substantial to the FBI and DEA soon, they would stop supporting my lavish lifestyle. I needed to bring something else to the table. I started to think about what other connections I had. What other strings could I pull to get some results? Get another arrest, another conviction to stick. Then I read in the paper that my old neighbor John DeLorean was having financial problems and was looking for investors for his car company. I could feel an idea for a new scam coming together. I already had an in with this famous person who was desperate for money. DeLorean's arrest, if we could pull it off, would be front page news. His near celebrity status meant a huge opportunity to end my career with one last big con. I knew DeLorean. The man was not a criminal. He wasn't into drugs or embezzling. He was an engineer at heart. A decent businessman. Bit of an ego, but no experience dealing with the criminal element. He was trusting almost to the point of being naive. This would make him such an easy mark. There was no way I would let this opportunity go. It was perfect.
On the morning of June 29th, I was called to testify in another federal drug case I had worked on.
DEA agent Gerald Scotti was assigned to pick me up and take me to Southern California Federal Courthouse. During the drive, I bragged to Scotti that I was going to deliver John DeLorean to the DEA. Later that day, I called John DeLorean at his office in New York City and started to set the trap. During my call, I reminded DeLorean about our sons and how they used to do motocross together. Showing a personal connection is the first step in gaining someone's confidence. I could tell that DeLorean was loosening up, reminiscing with his old neighbor. I told DeLorean that I had read in the paper that he was looking for investors for his company. DeLorean explained to me how the British government had violated their funding agreement and how thousands of jobs were at stake in Northern Ireland. I told DeLorean I knew some people with deep pockets that might be interested in investing in his firm. I told him to send me some financials on DeLorean Motor Cars of Ireland. After this, I would call my DEA handler, John Valestra, to pitch him on setting up John DeLorean. Valestra was disappointed. He was more interested in my progress on Hetrick. There hadn't been any. Valestra told me to put this DeLorean thing on the back burner and focus on Hetrick. But I couldn't let a good con go. A week later, on July 10th, I received the financial information from Mr. DeLorean at my office in LA. This was the office that the FBI had set up for me to look legitimate. I called DeLorean to set up a meeting for the next day. We agreed to meet in the main Brace Bar at the Newport Beach Marriott at 10 p.m. When DeLorean arrived, I led him to an isolated, dark booth in the back. DeLorean objected. He said he wanted some lighting to review the financial documents, but I refused to move to a different booth. I had set up a secret tape recorder that would record the conversation, but only in that booth. I told DeLorean that I could get him some investment financing, about $15 million, but I was just a middleman. DeLorean needed to pay me a $1.5 million commission and $300,000 in expenses up front, for a total of $1.8 million. Now I know every con and just the right way to play them. This tactic in my world is known as the advanced fee con. DeLorean was skeptical that I had those kinds of connections and he would not agree to any money up front. I had to get DeLorean to think that his old neighbor had real investors with lots of money. I told DeLorean to call James Benedict, the vice president at Eureka Federal Savings and Loan in San Carlos, California, to verify my financial status and funds. I told DeLorean that Benedict could arrange some financing on the 1,300 cars at the QACs. Every loan needs collateral, and the only collateral DeLorean had was his hundreds of unsold cars at his quality assurance centers. At this point, I didn't have any approval from the feds to be working a DeLorean deal. The next step, of course, was to get that approval. On the morning of July 12th, I called Tiza and Valestra. On the call, I told them that I had met with DeLorean last night, and he asked me about a drug deal, even though DeLorean and I hadn't talked about drugs at all. It was a total lie. But this is what you've got to do to survive in this business. You got to play both sides. I reminded Tiza and Valestra that to get John DeLorean would be front page news. It would help their careers, help them move up the ladder at the FBI and DEA, almost as much as bringing down Hetrick, possibly even more. This is fame, and how you play it to your advantage. Tiza and Valestra agreed. then and there to start a sting operation against John DeLorean. I told Tiza to expect John DeLorean's call. Starting in the mid-70s, the FBI had created multiple programs to entrap individuals into theft and bribery crimes. This entrapment would create crimes that would not exist if the FBI had not pushed their targets to commit them. As part of the program, the FBI set up a fake corporation,
Police FBI Fence Incognito,
or PFF Inc., that would pay for stolen goods without any records. Then they would arrest the thieves as they tried to fence their goods. This would later be expanded into a larger-scale operation known as the Abscam program, to bribe and arrest politicians. Eventually, Congress would find out that the FBI was entrapping politicians and ordinary citizens. Congress would investigate the Abscam program starting in 1982 and conclude that the FBI had overreached. Congress would issue a report requiring the FBI to establish stricter policies to be followed in entrapment cases. So Valestra, Tiza, and I had to be careful about how we handled DeLorean. But I was convinced we could do it. So I kept telling Valestra and Tiza what they wanted to hear. That DeLorean was interested in a drug deal. With the Hetrick sting, we knew the guy was running drugs, but we just couldn't prove it. With DeLorean, it was different. We would have to take the guy who didn't want to break the law and get him to. DeLorean would call James Benedict the same day, reiterating his desire to get a loan based on 900 or all 1,300 cars at the QACs. These represented unsold inventory, and loans like that are pretty standard. DeLorean was looking to get a loan of about $15 million or about $13,000 per car. Of course, Benedict had no real authority to loan that kind of money. He didn't even really work at the bank. But he had to play along. Benedict backed up my story, saying that Mr. Hoffman was a big client at the Eureka Savings and Loan, and that I routinely had over $10 million on deposit there, to try and build up trust for the next part of the con. Otherwise, Benedict stalled for time and promised to call DeLorean back soon. A few days would pass, and on July 14th, John DeLorean called Benedict again and said he wanted to meet in person. But Benedict said he would only do a phone call, claiming he was too busy. During that phone call, Benedict talked about financing the unsold cars. But Benedict told DeLorean that he needed financial documents first. On July 20th, Roy Nesseth of DMCL sent the financial information to Benedict.
In mid-July, Valestra informed me that he and Tiza got very direct authority to target John DeLorean.
Tiza was told to make sure the FBI got John DeLorean one way or another.
They were also required to send daily reports to Washington on how the setup was going. Valestra told me to focus on DeLorean while the two of them worked to set up Hetrick. It was in early August when I put it all together.
I figured it out. Cracked the case. I pitched Tiza and Valestra on the idea of bringing the Hetrick sting and the DeLorean sting together. I told them, if Hetrick isn't taking the bait, then you need different bait. The money laundering you're offering is generic. It's boring. It's exactly the kind of unimaginative effort you would expect from the schmucks at the FBI and DEA. But if you dangle the idea of investing in this hot new sports car, it makes the deal interesting. You get DeLorean at the table. You get Hetrick to listen to his sob story about saving jobs in Ireland. It might do the trick. Misdirection. It focuses the deal on the car. And Benedict and I look like a couple of middlemen, just trying to get our cut, helping out a desperate guy, and we look a lot less like a bunch of undercover feds. I told them DeLorean could probably be coerced into a drug deal to get money to save his car company, and we could get Hetrick to supply the drug and catch him in the sting as well. Balestra and Tiza agreed, and I started work on the next part of my plan. DeLorean had not bought into my advanced fee con at the Marriott, but I kept talking to him. On August 2nd, I called up DeLorean. I told him I had very good news. But then I changed the subject to talk about articles in the paper concerning DeLorean Motor Company's financial problems. A little emotional manipulation to get him off his guard and to create urgency. I told DeLorean my investors were still interested and that I would draw up a cash flow projection and show it to him at our next in-person meeting. We agreed to meet over the weekend on August 7th. But I ended up having to cancel that meeting because of other side jobs I was doing at the time. DeLorean and I would not meet for another 4 weeks. On August 13th, Tiza sent a memo to FBI headquarters describing what he called Operation Full Circle. Operation Full Circle involved setting up both John DeLorean and Hetrick in the same drug sting.
On August 17th, the operation began. Benedict called Hetrick and pitched him a new investment idea.
Benedict said he knew of a car company that was in desperate and urgent need for some working capital type funding. Benedict told Hetrick that it involved working with John DeLorean's sports car business and mentioned the current cars that could be put up as collateral. Hetrick showed a mild interest, but he said that if the investment was something like $100 million, it might be out of his league. But Benedict reassured him they would only need about $2 million. He added that the return might be something like $20 or $25 million. It was a total deception, but it got Hetrick interested in a possible partnership. On August 19th, and then again on the 24th, Tiza would reach out to DeLorean and assure him that things were going very well to generate some financing. Now all I had to do was get DeLorean to meet with me. On August 31st, I called DeLorean and told him I wanted to set up another meeting for September 4th. DeLorean told me he was going to be in Washington, D.C. that day. I decided to have some fun and told DeLorean that we should meet at the L'Enfant Plaza Hotel.
This was a very exclusive hotel in D.C.
I figured since the FBI was going to be paying for this meeting, I might as well enjoy myself. I told DeLorean that I would call him later with the details. I called Tiza and told him of my plans to meet DeLorean at the L'Enfant Hotel in D.C. Tiza said that he would send 2 agents that day to D.C. to set up a suite with a secret camera and microphone so that they could record the meeting on audio and videotape. I was impressed. This was going to be the first meeting the FBI would tape for my entrapment of DeLorean. The FBI would spend thousands of dollars to pay my airfare and for me to stay at this very expensive hotel, and then pay to send additional agents to tape our meeting. Entrapping DeLorean had really become a major operation, and the FBI was willing to spend millions to do it. On September 1st, Tiza called me and said that his agents had surveillance set up in Suite 2112. On September 3rd, I got some information on just how much money Hetrick had stashed in offshore accounts. Over $3 million. I called Tiza and demanded that I get up to 10% of any assets seized as a result of Operation Full Circle. Getting a kickback for information that helped bring down a suspect was common practice for confidential informants at the time, and I wanted what I felt was my share. But my demand was rejected. On September 4th, DeLorean and I met at the L'Enfant Plaza Hotel. When DeLorean entered the suite, he remarked that this was a very nice place. This hotel was perfect. DeLorean clearly got the impression that I had money to burn. DeLorean again related to me in detail how Thatcher had decided to breach the contract and that the British government owed DMCL $94 million. I told DeLorean, "We have a group right now. They have the ability to come up with, for sure, $30 million. James Benedict has been talking to them." I told him that these investors were Colombian folks not interested in sitting around in a boardroom, but he didn't seem to get the hint. DeLorean thought that there were legitimate businesses in every country in the world, even Colombia. So I presented DeLorean my flowcharts showing how millions of dollars could be made on a drug deal, as long as he was willing to invest $1.8 million up front. In my world, this is called a greed con. DeLorean listened, but he kept wanting to bring the conversation back to interim financing for the cause. In other words, a loan that had nothing to do with drugs. He clearly didn't want to go for the drug deal, but I was persistent. I kept pushing, insisting that the drug deal was going to go through no matter what. It was already in the works, and that if he got involved, he would never even handle the product, but also heavily insinuating that if he refused, there might be unpleasant consequences. Finally, DeLorean told me he couldn't get involved in anything because he had absolutely no money to put towards a deal. His excuse was that the $1.8 million I wanted was locked up in Northern Ireland with the Irish Republican Army. He insisted nothing could go forward until he consulted with his IRA associates about it, implying that he had militant friends of his own who might protect him. This, of course, was not true. DeLorean was trying to con me, a master con man, trying to get out of my trap. So our meeting ended with DeLorean not committing to anything. But I wasn't going to let him off that easy. It was time to find another angle to play. DeLorean still believed he was working with legitimate banker James Benedict to set up financing based on cars at the DMC Quality Assurance Centers. On September 7th, DeLorean called Benedict to follow up on that possibility. It was now up to Tiza to bring drugs back into the equation. Tiza told DeLorean that he had an investor in mind who could potentially solve DeLorean's problems. He didn't give DeLorean a name, but this was, of course, William Morgan Hetrick. DeLorean pushed again for an in-person meeting. Unable to put it off any longer, Benedict finally agreed to an in-person meeting the following day. On Wednesday, September 8, 1982, John DeLorean met in person with James Benedict for the first time, in his office at Eureka Savings and Loan. Tiza's office had been set up with recording equipment for other FBI cases, so this meeting was on audio and videotape. While DeLorean kept trying to steer the conversation into a traditional loan, Benedict spun it towards drugs again. Benedict told DeLorean that he knows a person who was very successful in bringing in cocaine and putting it out selling on the street. DeLorean once again listened and went along politely, but reiterated that he could do nothing without the approval of his Irish associates. Tiza arranged for Kidwell, the president of the bank, to appear at the end of the meeting and reinforce to John DeLorean that Benedict was an actual bank employee, and his offer of financing was genuine. Still, DeLorean wouldn't commit to any kind of deal firmly. DeLorean finally realized that he had involved himself in a criminal conspiracy. Organized crime controlled Eureka Savings and Loan. Their reach was huge. Frightened, he reached out to his lawyer Tom Kimmerly and sought his advice. Kimmerly had told him to delay as much as possible, string Benedict and Hoffman along, but never agree to anything concrete. Eventually, he said they would get tired and get what they wanted from somewhere else. This is exactly what he had done so far. After a few days of thinking it over, though, he decided it was all too much. DeLorean couldn't risk getting involved in anything illegal, even tangentially. That would be the death knell of DeLorean Motor Company for sure, and his reputation along with it. Often during our conversations, DeLorean would mention how the British receivers Kenneth Cork and Paul Schewel were constantly hounding him to get money and threatening to close down the plant if he didn't come up with financing right away. Yet somehow, they always kept giving him short extensions at the last minute. It would come out during John DeLorean's trial in 1984 that the FBI was secretly communicating with the British government. The British government was aware of the sting operation against DeLorean as early as September 7, 1982, well over a month before he would actually be arrested. Incidentally, these correspondences are still classified by the British government. To accommodate the drug stings timetable, the FBI and DEA needed the Thatcher government to delay closing the plant, but continue to apply financial pressure on DeLorean to get him to take the bait. September 10th was the first deadline for funding set by the receivers Kenneth Cork and Paul Schewel. On that day, DeLorean got a call from them and mysteriously, without any explanation, they told him that they are extending the deadline. He also started receiving daily telexes from the receivers demanding money soon or they would close the DeLorean plant in Dunmurry. That same day, September 10th, Agent Teaser sent a telex to FBI headquarters seeking approval to spend over $17,860 on videotaping of two subjects involved in large-scale narcotics transactions, in addition to the laundering and investment of large amounts of illegally received income. However, Teaser had already videotaped 2 meetings with DeLorean without getting proper FBI approval first. In order to hide this fact from FBI headquarters, working with DEA agent Valestra, Teaser backdated paperwork to make it look like approval for videotaping had occurred in early September. This backdating was intended to make the videotapes of these first 2 meetings admissible as evidence. On September 10th, FBI agents met with the head of security at the Bel Air Sands Hotel and requested 2 suites for undercover work for the next few weeks. The first room was outfitted with audio and video recording equipment, and the other room would be their control center.
2 days later, Benedict met with Hetrick in the bugged room at the Bel Air Sands. Benedict pushed the conversation to drugs several times, trying to get Hetrick to agree to import some cocaine. But Hetrick would spin it back with several solid and articulate reasons for why he didn't want to do a deal if it involved me. Hetrick even heard through the grapevine that everyone that gets involved with me somehow gets screwed over. Hetrick considered himself an ethical and honest businessman, and he considered me a greedy and sleazy salesman. So Benedict switched to our other strategy and tried to get Hetrick interested in investing in DeLorean Motor Company. This, he explained, would be a different way for Hetrick to launder his money in the Cayman Islands. Hetrick responded that he did not think DeLorean Motor Company was a viable investment. He knew about the poor craftsmanship coming out of Northern Ireland, and the fact that Kenneth Cork or the British government could easily shut down DMCL if they wanted. Hetrick told Benedict,
I don't know that I'd want $15 in it, let alone $15 million.
And also told him that there were other sports cars like Toyotas and other rice burners that were better than DeLoreans. Once again, it looked like Hetrick wasn't going to bite on anything we had to offer. On the John DeLorean side, things weren't looking great either. DeLorean had realized that there was no way he could get a legitimate loan from Eureka Savings and Loan.
He now believed we were dangerous criminals who had no problem eliminating anyone that crossed us.
He was under major stress to save his company. And now Teaser and I were pushing him to break the law. Stringing us along finally became too much for him. On Wednesday, September 15th, DeLorean called Benedict and said that he couldn't go through with any of it. He phrased it gently, where it wasn't exactly his fault so we wouldn't be too upset. He explained to Benedict that all his money was locked up with the IRA and the British receivers.
He said he had no collateral and was very sorry, but the deal was off. It was basically the same line he had used with me when we had met at the L'Enfant Plaza. Later that day, Tisa called to give me the news. He told me DeLorean was bailing on the deal. This was getting incredibly frustrating. Neither of our marks were taking the bait. My master plan was falling apart. DeLorean was being incredibly resistant, just like Hetrick. Neither of them would commit to doing anything illegal. I knew we had to step it up a notch if we were going to get this done. I immediately called DeLorean. "Benedict tells me you don't have the money and the deal's dead," I said. No matter what I tried to tell him, he wouldn't listen. DeLorean ended the conversation. He wanted out. That much was clear. I was pissed. If this fell through, if this ended up another failure, the FBI might decide I'm no good as a CI. I would be off their payroll, out of the good life. I'd be up the creek without a paddle. The marks were getting away. I could not let that happen with all the time we'd invested in this. Not when we were this close. It was time to raise the stakes for Mr. DeLorean. It was time for a new strategy. In a threat con, one uses threats of physical violence against the mark or his loved ones to extort or coerce them to cooperate. I might have been working for the feds, but I was still a mobster. I knew how to put the screws on people. I waited for the middle of the night to call DeLorean back. Knowing the ringing phone would wake him up, groggy and confused, I told him, "You're in this too far. Now you know too much. You know the players, you know the bank. You can't get out. If you try to get out, there's going to be a bloody mess. I'll send your baby daughter's head home in a shopping bag. When Benedict calls you tomorrow, you better do whatever he says." I made DeLorean realize what it's really like when you're dealing with the mob. I think I made him see reason. Or maybe I just made him shit his pants. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the deal was still on, and DeLorean was still in. It turns out the threat of violence is an enormously powerful tool. This is fear, and how you play it to your advantage. A few days later, in mid-September 1982, DEA agent Valestra called me. He wanted me to testify before the federal grand jury so that the DEA and the FBI could get warrants to arrest Hetrick and DeLorean on narcotics violations. To arrest someone on federal charges, a federal grand jury must determine that there is enough evidence in a case to arrest someone. This was a critical step in getting this whole job wrapped up. Of course, neither Hetrick nor DeLorean had actually agreed to break the law. We were pushing. But both of them were telling us, no. Valestra, Tisa, and I didn't say it in so many words, but we all knew what was at stake. Our careers hung in the balance. These agents had already promised their co-workers and their bosses that they were bringing down John DeLorean. We had all promised front-page news. And now, we had to deliver. The next day, I received a subpoena from the U.S. Attorney for Southern California. It was time to present our case to the Southern California Federal Grand Jury. By now, I knew exactly how this worked. I told the jury exactly what they needed to hear. And it's not every day you get to con a grand jury. Like I said before, everybody lies. I'm just better at it. At the hearing, I laid it all out. I, James Hoffman, along with William Morgan Hetrick and John DeLorean, are plotting to import 100 kilos of cocaine into the United States worth some $30 million. I've recorded every conversation with John DeLorean, and the FBI have recorded all the meetings with Hetrick. Hetrick and DeLorean are conspiring to import the cocaine, sell it,
and then launder the proceeds through Eureka Savings and Loan. The cocaine is to be imported by Hetrick and some of his associates, though I do not know the name of his associates. The FBI and DEA, with the help of their confidential informant, are about to shut down a major drug smuggling operation. Tiza, Valestra, and I knew this story was nowhere near true. In reality, DeLorean and Hetrick had never even spoken to one another. But we needed a victory here, and by any means necessary. I was teaching Valestra and Tiza the art of playing both sides. The true art of a good con. Thanks to my very persuasive testimony, the grand jury voted to indict Hetrick and DeLorean along with persons unknown who would be importing the cocaine. The FBI and DEA now had the authority to arrest Hetrick and DeLorean. The only thing missing, of course, was actual evidence of either of them committing any sort of crime. But as soon as we had that, it would be a done deal. My threats against DeLorean's family seemed to have done the trick with him. I knew he was afraid. But I also knew he would reluctantly show up in more meetings if it kept us from hurting him and his family. Hetrick was a different story. He was no stranger to violence. Threatening Hetrick would probably end up with me sleeping with the fishes. He almost certainly had more friends capable of hurting someone than I did. So we needed a different tactic to get Hetrick on board. Luckily, I wasn't out of tricks yet. I knew that Hetrick had his sons helping him out with his business, so he was a family man. So Tiza and I laid out what is known as a friends and family con. This con is used to lower a mark's guard, create a sense of trust, of family obligation. This makes them more susceptible to a scam. We needed to create a friendly and trusting atmosphere between Hetrick and his money laundering pal Benedict. For this to work, we needed some ladies. Tiza and I were finally able to bring Hetrick and DeLorean together in the same room at the Bel Air Sands Hotel on Monday, September 20th, 1982. Tiza brought along a fellow FBI agent, Jill, who pretended to be Tiza's attorney and friend. And we invited Hetrick to bring along his girlfriend, Debbie. As Jill welcomed John DeLorean into the hotel room, Benedict, Hetrick, and Debbie were already there. Jill made some friendly and flirtatious small talk with John. Then she whisked Debbie down to the hotel bar for drinks, leaving the guys in the room to talk business. It was just DeLorean, Hetrick, Benedict, and a hidden video camera. DeLorean, once again, talked at length about how Thatcher had breached the contract with DMCL and owed them $94 million. Hetrick was still skeptical, raising various financial and tax concerns about investing in DMCL. DeLorean mentioned that there were several legitimate and perfectly legal ways Hetrick could invest his money through Europe and get some excellent tax advantages. And he could do this without Eureka Savings and Loan and without Benedict. DeLorean was probably trying to eke out a little leverage over us. But Hetrick was being very careful. He would not agree to doing anything illegal, particularly aware that the government was still after him. Benedict blatantly lied to Hetrick, telling him that DeLorean had already done his part to put up $1.8 million as collateral and that it was sitting in Eureka Bank. DeLorean, for his part, said nothing to contradict this, knowing what I had promised to do to his family if he didn't play along. Benedict interrupted a few times, trying to put more pressure on Hetrick, asking him when he was going to import some cocaine. But Hetrick neatly deflected that question. Hetrick seemed to enjoy talking to DeLorean. At least, his stories were entertaining. But Hetrick was still skeptical about Benedict. While nothing was agreed to yet, the friends and family con seemed to have at least started to build some trust with Hetrick. He was coming around to the idea of structuring some sort of deal. The meeting ended politely, with the men agreeing to go locate their women and meet later for dinner. At this point, DEA agent John Valestra was getting impatient, sitting on the sidelines. He pointed out that Tiza was not getting the job done. So Valestra thought he might take a shot at helping to reel DeLorean in. Valestra would assume the character of drug kingpin John Vicenza, and I would introduce him as Benedict's boss. The next meeting was at the Bonaventure Hotel in downtown Los Angeles on September 28, 1982. The FBI had set up a room with hidden cameras, microphones, the works. This was going to be the meeting where we'd finally get DeLorean on tape, saying the things we needed him to say. But I wasn't the one running the show this time. Valestra was, and that made me nervous. See, there's a difference between a mobster and a cop playing a mobster. A mobster lives it. He doesn't have to think about what a criminal would say because he is one. A cop is pretending, reading a script in his head. And if you spent any time around real criminals, things start to feel off. When DeLorean walked in, I made the introductions. I told him Vicenza was the man who pulled the strings behind Benedict, the boss behind the boss. DeLorean shook his hand, sat down, and said, "It's my pleasure." He was polite, stiff, guarded. Then Valestra started talking, and right away I knew we had a problem. Valestra opened with, "John, we may never meet again, but things are going to happen in the next couple of days." Now, what kind of drug kingpin says that? We may never meet again. Valestra was performing. Like he'd watched a mob movie the night before and was doing his best impression. The mask was starting to slip, and we were only 5 minutes in. But it got worse. Valestra started questioning DeLorean's business. Now, I understand what he was trying to do. He wanted to remind DeLorean how desperate he was for money, while still showing interest in bailing DeLorean out of his financial problems. The problem was how he did it. He was hitting point after point. Is the company viable? Are the cars selling? Might this be throwing good money after bad? He was methodical, like he was working down a checklist, building a record for the tape. And I'm sitting there watching DeLorean's face. I saw something behind his eyes. He was a man watching a performance that he didn't quite believe. If DeLorean suspected that this whole thing was an act, the entire operation could be finished. Months of work, gone. But DeLorean didn't walk out. He sat there, and we kept talking. Not because he bought the act, but because he was afraid of what would happen to his wife and kids if he didn't play along. Now, the situation here requires some explanation. DeLorean Motor Cars of Ireland Limited, DMCL, was the real company. That was the Belfast factory, the workers, the tooling, the cars being assembled. DMCL was majority owned by the British government and controlled by the receivers Kenneth Cork and Paul Schewel. DeLorean could not sell it. He could not transfer it. It was not his to give. Now separately, Vicenza was proposing a new shell company that would be set up through Eureka Savings and Loan. DeLorean Motor Company Incorporated, DMC Inc. This was an American shell corporation. When Vicenza and DeLorean sat down to negotiate, they discussed a 50-50 split and the issuing of stock certificates. All of this was for ownership of DMC Inc., a name on a piece of paper, nothing more. Vicenza and I didn't care. We just needed the negotiation on tape. While DeLorean made his pitch, Vicenza and I talked about the money we were about to make from our numerous drug deals.
DeLorean sat and listened, and all his fears returned. And now I was in the midst of their world, hearing about their crimes, gaining information that, if revealed to the proper law enforcement officers, could result in their being jailed. I was being dragged into a circle I did not want to be in. If anyone was expendable, I was. If someone had to die to ensure that their activities could continue, I was undoubtedly going to be that victim. But DeLorean was smarter than we gave him credit for. He could tell the drug talk was nonsense. The deals Vicenza described kept changing. The numbers didn't add up. The whole thing felt like an act. He believed even more firmly that organized crime was trying to take control of his company. So DeLorean started planning an exit strategy. Could he get some of the mob's money, bail out his immediate financial problems, and leave the mob with a worthless shell company? Could he somehow also keep him and his family safe? DeLorean got the idea that if he could set us up to get caught laundering money, he might be able to get out of this alive. Then came the moment we had been working toward for months. We insisted that DeLorean call Morgan Hetrick. We needed DeLorean on tape, connecting him directly to Hetrick and the cocaine. DeLorean picked up the phone. He tracked Hetrick down at a restaurant called the Greenhouse. And then he said the words we needed him to say. "Morgan, John DeLorean. I've been asked to call you and tell you not to order too much food." He got a laugh. Then, "They'd like to go ahead with those monkeys you had up in San Francisco. They got the cash ready and they want to go ahead and buy them." Monkeys. That was Hetrick's code word for cocaine. But notice what DeLorean actually said. "I've been asked to call you. They'd like to go ahead. They got the cash ready. Not I, not we, they." He was relaying a message, saying words he'd been told to say, distancing himself as much as he could. But on the tape, it would look like a man running a drug deal. The kingpin and I nodded to each other. We finally had something. It wasn't quite enough, but boy, were we close. After the Bonaventure meeting,
I figured we were almost there.
DeLorean had called Hetrick. He'd used the word monkeys. He'd sat there while the Lestra and I talked about drug deals. It looked like progress, but Hetrick still would not commit to bringing in any product, so nothing had actually changed. But big things were happening behind the scenes to tip things in our favor. On September 30th, DeLorean called me saying that he got a very complicated and difficult directive from the British receivers by telex. They were threatening to close DMCL immediately unless DeLorean provided some hard evidence of new funding. This is just what I was hoping for. The Mark was now in a deadline situation to force action on the con. It came out later, at trial and in published accounts, that the British government had gone further than just coordinating with the FBI and squeezing DeLorean through the receivers, Cork and Sewell. They had contacted Bank of America and Chemical Bank of New York, and they had convinced both institutions not to lend to DeLorean Motor Company. DeLorean probably thought the market had turned against him, that nobody believed in the car anymore, that the receivership had spooked them. But it wasn't the market. It was Thatcher, closing off any other option DeLorean might have to get funds to save his company. That left only one door still open. A con artist, a fake banker, and a barely passable drug kingpin. After DeLorean tried to bail on us on September 15th, the hounding calls from Cork and Sewell started almost immediately. The receivers' flexibility, all their previous deadline extensions and pushbacks evaporated overnight. The daily telexes came back with a vengeance. The threats to close the plant.
This was the FBI feeding daily intelligence to the Brits and the British using it to push DeLorean back toward us. DeLorean says no. FBI tells London. London tells the receivers. Receivers call DeLorean. Where's the money? You have days, not weeks. DeLorean calls Benedict. Is the financing still available? And just like that, the mark is back in our hands. I guess Operation Full Circle lived up to its name. Then, on October 5th, DeLorean received a wire from the British government.
Unless, by 1800 hours our time tomorrow, you provide us with independent confirmation that not less than $10 million is available to DMCL as working capital, and will be paid into that company's account at the time the agreement for the acquisition of Northern Ireland assets is completed, we shall announce as consequence final closure of the facility.
Less than a day. That's what they gave him. DeLorean, pushed to the wall, tried to get Benedict to function as a real banker. Talk to the receivers. Give them a letter of confirmation that money was coming soon. That's all he needed. Should Benedict and his people give me a letter of confirmation concerning their intention to provide legitimate funds, I could still save my company. The problem was that Benedict wasn't a real banker. He was FBI agent Benjamin Tiza, sitting in a borrowed office pretending. Anything he said to those receivers would be a lie that could unravel the entire operation. So Benedict said no. But he would have no choice when the British bankers called him directly the next day. On the call were Christopher Hahn from a British investment firm, Bob Benjamin, the lawyer for DMCL, Paul Schewel, one of the receivers, and Benedict. Bob Benjamin got right to the point.
Co-receivers in the UK-Irish subsidiary are vitally interested in knowing if there is any real possibilities that you have $10 million in financing available. John has indicated to me that upon the advice of your in-house counsel, you have determined that it would not be appropriate for you to speak with the receivers. Is that the case?
And Benedict, Tiza, gave the only answer he could.
They've advised me that it would be inappropriate for me to speak to anyone about it at this point in time.
Benjamin pushed harder.
When would you be willing to discuss anything with them?
Until we are further along the line with this matter, we are not in a position to make any statements about pending transactions.
I think one of the things you perhaps do not understand is just how urgent it is in time. I think it is absolutely critical.
It was critical. Critical that Benedict not blow his cover and not promise the British receivers something that he could not possibly deliver. But it turns out that's exactly what DeLorean was hoping for. Suddenly, Benedict was the one who was stalling. He was being backed into the corner, though I failed to realize that this was because of the government's case, not because I was triumphing over organized crime. After the Bob Benjamin call, everything went quiet. Tiza couldn't move on the banking side, and Hetrick had vanished. No phone calls, no messages, no nothing. We couldn't find him anywhere. And then on October 13th, the phone rang. Hetrick called Benedict, out of nowhere. He told Benedict he would have the product delivered to Los Angeles on October 18th. Just like that, the operation had a timeline again. Hetrick's call didn't just give us cocaine, it gave us a date. And once we had that date, everything else fell into place. The next day, October 14th, Benedict called DeLorean. Come to Los Angeles. We will pick you up at the airport. We'll drive to your offices in Irvine, California. DeLorean reluctantly agreed. He knew what had happened the last time he tried to say no.
I'll send your baby daughter's head home in a shopping bag.
That same day, October 14th, FBI agents met with security at the Sheraton Plaza Hotel and set up recording equipment in 507, the suite next to room 501. The trap was set. And the only thing left was for Hetrick and DeLorean to walk through the door. 1,200 miles to the east, a man named Steve Arrington was driving a car full of cocaine from Florida to Los Angeles. The drugs were actually on their way. Arrington was Hetrick's driver. His job was simple: drive a Chevy Caprice from Florida to Los Angeles. He was supposed to deliver the car to the Sheraton Hotel and avoid any trouble. 25 kilos of cocaine were hidden in a compartment under the rear seat. He'd done things like this before. But by the fall of 1982, Arrington had had enough. He was trying to find his way out of Hetrick's organization. Arrington drove cross-country, made it to Los Angeles, and then made his move. He pulled into Van Nuys Airport, a good 40 minutes from where he was supposed to be, parked the Chevy Caprice, and called Morgan Hetrick. He told Hetrick he was done. He wanted out. The car was at Van Nuys. If Hetrick wanted the car and its contents, they were going to have a conversation first. Hetrick did not take the news well. 25 kilos of coke was nearly $2 million worth. Hetrick had fronted all that money out of his Cayman's account. He told Arrington, "You're not out. If you think you're out, the Medellin cartel will go through your family like a chainsaw. You deliver that car to the hotel." Sound familiar? A man who wants out, forced back into the machinery by threats to his family. Threats of violence aren't a tool the mob uses occasionally. They are the engine that drives the system top to bottom. But Arrington held his ground. The cocaine stayed under the rear seat, and the car stayed at Van Nuys Airport amongst a sea of other cars, like a needle in a haystack. Hetrick was flying in the next morning on a tight schedule, and he couldn't make his delivery, hold up his end without that coke. Somebody had to go get it, and quickly. October 18th, 1982, a day before DeLorean's arrest. A Pan Am flight touched down at LAX. One of the passengers was Morgan Hetrick. Agent Tiza, traveling as James Benedict, met him at the terminal. They got in a car and headed for the Sheraton Hotel. I was already there, in room 501. Hetrick arrived with two problems. First, the coke wasn't with him. Arrington still had it. Second, there were only 25 kilos and his buyers were expecting 100. 100 kilos would have been a major shipment, the kind of bust that would have made Operation Full Circle one of the biggest drug seizures in DEA history. Hetrick only had 25 kilos, and he didn't even have it with him. Hetrick's explanation was that he'd been told $1.8 million was all that had been agreed to. So he only brought what $1.8 million would cover. Let's back up a minute. I was told that $1.8 million was all that you had. Nobody said that they wanted any more than that or could pay for any more than that. Benedict pushed back.
No, we were banking on 100 kilos. It didn't quite work out that way, right?
I promised Hetrick that next time things would go smoother. I also told him we had no one available that night to test it. Hetrick held his ground on the 25 kilos he'd brought. He promised the remaining 75 would follow within a few days. We weren't going to get everything we wanted tonight, but the operation was still going forward. At approximately 7:45 in the evening, there was a knock on the door of room 501. The kingpin Vicenza, Agent Valestra, playing the role of our Colombian money man, entered the room. Behind him was Agent Scotty, playing Vicenza's henchman. The new arrivals applied more pressure on Hetrick about the missing 75 kilos. Hetrick made more excuses. I had to go out of the United States, and we had to have a high-level meeting in Grand Cayman to make this come about at all, okay? We had a transportation problem this particular time. Still, the meeting wrapped on reasonably amicable terms. Now things shifted to logistics. Scotty would drive Vicenza and Arrington to the Chevy Caprice at Van Nuys, while Benedict and Hetrick would go out to dinner to celebrate. Later that night, in the Van Nuys parking lot, Arrington pointed out the Chevy Caprice and pulled the lever under the dashboard that released the rear seat. This revealed the hidden compartment and the goods. Scotty opened one of the packages, and out came the handcuffs. He later wrote about what he found in his arrest report. Multiple kilo-sized packages wrapped in brown wrapping paper with masking tape. I removed one of the packages, which I noted was marked RCX in blue felt tip pen. I pierced the outer wrapper with a key. Scotty confirmed it was cocaine, and Arrington was arrested. The car was impounded, the cocaine was seized. Arrington had gotten out of Hetrick's drug organization, just not the way he'd expected. And the cocaine was now evidence in a federal drug smuggling case. Meanwhile, Hetrick and Benedict had left the Sheraton for dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in Hollywood. The kind of place with a wine list that costs more than most people's car payments. While Hetrick was eating, FBI and DEA teams got into position outside. A good meal lowers a man's guard better than almost anything else. He's full, relaxed. He's had a glass or two of wine. At 11:15 p.m., Hetrick and Benedict walked out of the restaurant and into the hands of federal agents. Operation Full Circle had accomplished its original mission. The feds had Morgan Hetrick in handcuffs and 25 kilos of cocaine in their hands. From the FBI's point of view, it was a successful night. The question now was what came next. The Hetrick con was over, and the FBI and DEA had to prepare to take down their final target, John DeLorean. Very late that night, there was a meeting at a Los Angeles hotel.
An emergency session.
Everyone was there.
Teza, Valestra, Scotty, other associated agents, Jerry West, Aguilar.
Waters, even James Walsh, the government lawyer who would end up being the lead prosecuting attorney at the DeLorean trial.
But they didn't invite me. Now I get it. You don't invite the con man to the high-level FBI DEA meeting. But I built this operation. Every meeting, every phone call, every threat and lie that had gotten us to this moment was me. So, it stung.
It was late. Everyone was tired and cranky. But it turns out the meeting was a fierce one for a reason no one expected. Now, in every con, there are players and marks. But occasionally, one of your players will go rogue and develop a conscience. A conscientious objector. A guy who wants to shut things down because he thinks it's wrong. And that makes him the most unpredictable person in the room. A good con depends on everyone knowing their role. The moment one of your players starts asking whether what you're doing is ethical, the whole thing can fall apart. DEA agent Gerald Scotty took it upon himself to be our conscientious objector. He was assigned to play one of Vicenza's henchmen. He's the guy who picked me up on June 29th and drove me to the court to testify. That's the day I first bragged about delivering DeLorean to the feds. Scotty was right there for it. He was a good agent, thorough, by the book. And that was the problem. Now, everything I'm about to tell you, I wasn't there for. What I know about this meeting, I pieced together from what the other agents said, from Scotty's own testimony at the trial, from newspaper articles and headlines, from reading between the lines. So this is my own reconstruction. My best guess of what happened behind closed doors. Teza probably opened the meeting.
He told the agents that FBI headquarters had given the order.
DeLorean was to be arrested in the morning, October 19th.
Don't wait for a stronger case. Get it done. And the order didn't come from some mid-level supervisor in the LA field office. It came from the top. The executive branch that controls the Department of Justice and the FBI. Edwin Meese, Reagan's personal lawyer. His political fixer. Meese had been the one handling what the British government called the DeLorean problem. And Reagan and Thatcher wanted it solved. Now. Tiza was providing daily reports to his supervisors, but they weren't just going to FBI headquarters in Washington. They were being forwarded to the British government. Meese had been giving Thatcher's people in the UK copies of our progress reports. Details of every meeting, every phone call, every delay. And in exchange, the British government would instruct the receivers to send specific telexes to DeLorean, pushing back their funding deadlines just enough to give a little shred of hope that the factory could stay open. Enough to get DeLorean to one more hotel room, with another hidden camera. But it had been over 6 months, and Thatcher was done waiting. She wanted DeLorean arrested, and she wanted it yesterday. The purpose of the emergency meeting was not to decide if they were ready. It was to let everyone know that the decision had already been made. The FBI and DEA had just one job: get it done. That's when Scotty pushed back. Now, the way I heard it, Scotty laid it out plain. There was no evidence. DeLorean had not funded any drug deal. He hadn't bought, sold, or touched a single gram of cocaine. He showed up to meetings. He talked about saving jobs in Belfast. He talked about how Thatcher's government had violated the funding contract. He discussed investment structures. That's it. Scotty argued that the whole point of Operation Full Circle was to catch Morgan Hetrick, and they had him. They'd get their conviction. All they had to do was take the win. On the other hand, the evidence against DeLorean was shaky at best. Scotty argued that the best thing to do was to let DeLorean go, since a case against him would probably not hold up in court. Scotty was right. But being right doesn't always mean you win. Tiza's response was probably some version of orders are orders. Tiza was a company man. He'd been sending those daily reports upstairs for months. Did he know that the British government was reading them? Did Tiza realize that this whole operation had evolved from a drug bust into a plot entangled with political interests? Even if he did, Tiza had his orders, and Tiza followed orders. With Scotty's objections dismissed, the conversation turned to a practical problem. The problem of the cocaine. If you're going to arrest DeLorean for involvement in a drug conspiracy, you need the drugs in the room with him. It looks better on camera, in court, for the press. The problem came down to timing. They had Hetrick, they had cocaine, but technically that cocaine was supposed to be locked away in an evidence locker the moment they arrested Arrington. The law is very strict on this because evidence tampering is itself a crime. If they locked the cocaine away in evidence, the only way to use it in the DeLorean sting the following morning was to get a court order for its release. And there was no way to get a court order processed in time. So the agents in that room were staring at 3 choices, all of them bad. 1. They could use the cocaine from Hetrick as the prop cocaine in the room with DeLorean. This would be mishandling of evidence, and DeLorean would likely not get convicted. 2. They could put something together that looked like the Hetrick cocaine. They were in a hotel. They could grab a suitcase, some plastic bags, some white powder, and put it on the table next to DeLorean. You'd have the prop, but you'd be faking evidence, which is just as bad or maybe worse than mishandling evidence. Or 3. They could arrest DeLorean in a hotel room with cameras rolling for drug offenses with no drugs anywhere in sight. And that option was clearly not going to fly because they needed the image. They needed video of DeLorean sitting next to what appeared to be a fortune in narcotics.
Because that's what this was really about. The visual. And once that story is on the evening news, on every front page in the country, the truth won't stand a chance. That's when Scotty hit his breaking point. Scotty told them he was not comfortable with this. This was all a scam. Planting evidence. This was manufacturing a crime. Scotty said that it was going to make the FBI and DEA look bad. That it was going to come back on all of them. The plan went forward anyway. They would be sure. There was something in that suitcase, ready to open on the table. On October 19th at the Sheraton Plaza Hotel in room 501, DeLorean would be arrested. But here's the thing about Scotty. He wasn't just talk. After the arrest, after the cameras, the headlines, the footage that ran on every news station, Gerald Scotty resigned from the DEA. Scotty would end up having his day in court, becoming a key figure in DeLorean's coming legal defense.
An hour or two after the Hetrick arrest, something was happening on the other side of the Atlantic. In Belfast, Ireland, it was already the morning of the 19th. Barry Wills was one of the few people left managing the DeLorean Motor Company's operations in Northern Ireland. That morning, Barry received a call from Margaret Thatcher's office. The message was direct. DeLorean was going down tomorrow. Fire the employees. They knew, and the moment they had certainty, they pulled the trigger. This fact was later confirmed through trial testimony and declassified documents. For the Prime Minister's information, the Secretary of State of Northern Ireland has been aware for the last few days of the possibility of Mr. DeLorean being arrested. But it hadn't been the last few days. It had been the last few months. While the British receivers had been speaking publicly about doing everything possible to keep the plant alive, the British government had been secretly pushing hard to set up DeLorean's arrest. The moment they knew DeLorean would be taken out, they dropped the act and moved. Immediately. The plant closure created substantial additional costs for the British government. Tens of millions of pounds in unemployment and severance. In actuality, these unemployment payments would amount to millions more than the entire DeLorean project. And more than double the $94 million DeLorean claimed DMCL was owed. But Thatcher accepted that cost. Because her primary goal wasn't to save money, the point was to make sure Northern Irish Catholics no longer had the jobs and opportunities that John DeLorean had given them, and to make sure that when the whole project collapsed, it collapsed on DeLorean's name, not hers. The call to Barry Wills was the last piece of the puzzle, clicking into place. That same evening, back in New York, John DeLorean was near the end of his physical and mental resources. Months of threats against his family. Meetings with men he'd concluded were organized crime. Had convinced him he would never leave California alive. He wrote later, "I was the man who knew too much. But I was not going to let the people who murdered me go unpunished." So he sat down and wrote a letter to Tom Kimmerly. Tom Kimmerly was DeLorean's lawyer. DeLorean trusted him. DeLorean didn't call him on the phone. He was afraid that Kimmerly might talk him out of going to Los Angeles, or insist on going to law enforcement. DeLorean had calculated that going to the authorities would only accelerate the danger to his family. The people threatening him had told him as much. So instead of calling, he wrote. He wrote what he knew, what he'd figured out, what he intended to do about it. Hoffman, Benedict, Hetrick, and Vicenza are not what they appear to be. Don't be shocked. cocaine dealers. Too many things they have told me are literally impossible. They have also engaged me in a play acting scenario that is so Mickey Mouse I have trouble keeping a straight face. Yes, he'd seen through us. But not all the way. He'd landed on organized crime rather than federal agents, but he'd identified us as frauds. Then he wrote about his plan. Tomorrow, when they put the $10 million into Eureka and Benedict wire transfers it to Cork Gully, the mob will own 100% of DMC Incorporated, a corporate shell with no assets. In effect, the mob will have donated $10 million to the Belfast plant and have gotten virtually nothing for it. He thought he was going to outmaneuver us. Was it a perfect plan? No. There were legal complications he hadn't fully worked through. But the intent is unmistakable. He was trying to redirect the money to the workers, to the plant, to the thing he'd built in Ireland. He wasn't trying to get rich. He was trying to save something. And then he wrote one last thing. But if I'm wrong, and my death is from any but absolutely natural causes, take this letter to the police. Otherwise, destroy it. Tom, take care of my family. God bless you, John DeLorean. John DeLorean wrote that letter expecting to get professionally whacked the following day. He wrote it when there was no audience, no defense attorney coaching him, no arrest yet to strategize about. It was his private document, his letter to a dead man's world. The morning of October 19th, 1982, John DeLorean got up, put on his suit, and was about to go to Tom Kimmerly's office in Manhattan when he received a phone call. The meeting location had changed. The new location was a hotel in Los Angeles near LAX. This was always the plan. Get DeLorean to agree to fly out. Promise him a safe location. A place he knew and controlled like his office in Irvine. Then at the last minute, change it on him. Of course, it was going to be the Sheraton Hotel. The room was wired up. DeLorean heard the news and drew a different conclusion. This last-minute change of plans to a neutral site just confirmed what had kept me awake the night before. They're going to kill me, but I'm going to have the last laugh. I was almost too numb to be scared. Yet the way my mind was racing indicated that deep inside I was out of control. DeLorean left for Kimmerly's office. He handed over the sealed envelope personally. He didn't mail it, he went himself. To make sure it arrived. To make sure it would be there if he didn't come back. Then he headed for the airport. 3 FBI agents followed close behind. To make sure he took the flight. To make sure he was where he was supposed to be. The receiver's final deadline, their last window for rescuing the Belfast plant, passed while DeLorean was in the air. The plane descended toward LAX. The deadline had expired. Below, agents were taking their positions. American Airlines Flight 3 touched down at LAX at 2:25 in the afternoon. I was waiting at the curb in a white Cadillac Seville, purchased with FBI expense money. DeLorean came out of the terminal with no luggage. A dead man doesn't need luggage. We drove to the Sheraton Plaza Hotel on Wilshire Boulevard. When we pulled into the parking lot, DeLorean said he needed a moment before going up. He wrote about this later. They aren't going to kill me in the parking area, are they? Perhaps the elevator. The room. He was calculating where the hit would come. I told him I'd head up and he should come when he was ready. We were again in room 501. The same room where Hetrick had been filmed the night before. The stage was set. When DeLorean walked in, we directed him to a specific chair, the one in clear view of the hidden camera. The right angle, the right framing for what would become some of the most famous arrest footage in history at the time. Vicenza greeted DeLorean with wine and congratulations. And you work hard, you reap all the rewards, and that's what it's all about. Let's get some wine. You want some wine? DeLorean said, "Oh yeah, I'll have some wine. Dismal day." Dismal day. He wasn't just talking about the weather. The small talk drifted. DeLorean mentioned Ireland. Nothing's greener than Ireland. It rains. You know, you go 3 days without any rain, and they say there's a big drought. Vicenza asked about the company's status. DeLorean did what he always did. He talked business. We sold about 1,000 cars in the last 3 months, so that part of it is okay. We're right at the end of the line now with the guys in Ireland. They sent me a telex tonight saying that because we haven't shown the required amount of money, they were going to let the people go on Friday. The people working in the plant. That's what he said. Not the drugs, not his cut. He talked about the workers. Then he said something the agents in the monitoring room knew was a serious problem. You recognize that none of the money goes anywhere but in working capital of the business anyhow, you know. You're not doing anything with it, but it stays right in the business. Working capital. Car sales. The Belfast workforce. That's what was on tape. Then Vicenza pushed. About laundering, conduits for funds. DeLorean's answer was simple. Well, we haven't done that. I was told later that the monitoring room went quiet when he said that. He was on camera, in our room, with our equipment recording every syllable. And he had just told us, in plain English, that no money laundering had taken place. How were we going to get a conviction if this was our evidence? DeLorean, not wanting to antagonize men he believed were dangerous criminals, then described how it theoretically could be done. Through Switzerland, a Bahamian insurance company, international trading companies. But as DeLorean knew, and any auditor would have confirmed, it was actually impossible. The SEC monitored the American operations. British auditors monitored Belfast. The receivers controlled every penny. Laundering money through DMCL would have been like trying to smuggle a piano through a metal detector. DeLorean was just telling dangerous men what they wanted to hear, to stay alive. Then Vicenza said the words that changed everything. Well, let's show John what we're talking about. This is going to be like a magic act. He turned to me. Clear that stuff away, will you, Jim? Benedict went to the closet and brought out a suitcase. He placed it on the coffee table, opened it. Inside, what appeared to be bags of cocaine. Now, every con has a mark, an intended target. The advanced fee con was played on DeLorean. The friends and family con was played on Hetrick. But this time, the mark is everyone watching. The media, the public, the jury pool, every person who would see this footage on the evening news. We set up the camera. We put the cocaine on the table. We put DeLorean in the chair. We made sure the shot was framed like a drug deal on a crime show. This is what it had all been leading up to. Getting DeLorean on camera with a suitcase of cocaine. Once we had that, we'd let the media do the rest. The media loves a celebrity scandal. They don't ask questions. They don't look at the transcripts. They run the footage. And once every network in America has played the clip of John DeLorean sitting next to an open suitcase of cocaine, he's guilty. In the court of public opinion, he's convicted because it sells. What the public thought they knew about John DeLorean, the image of the celebrity CEO caught on camera in a drug deal, was manufactured. And it worked. For decades. DeLorean was baffled by the cocaine. For some reason, Benedict brought a suitcase of what he said was cocaine from the closet. I couldn't understand why. I wasn't buying any. I wasn't selling any. In every meeting, every phone call, every recorded conversation across the entire operation, there had been no arrangement, no agreement, no plan that involved John DeLorean handling cocaine. But he was in a room with men he believed would kill him if he didn't play along. So he played along. DeLorean looked at the suitcase and said, "It's better than gold." He laughed. "Gold weighs more than this, for God's sake." Then he looked at the packages. "What's the RCX mean?" he asked. Vicenza said, "Who the hell knows?" DeLorean laughed. "That's the code, huh?" Listen to what that sounds like on tape. A man laughing about cocaine, saying it's better than gold. That clip, pulled from context, played on the evening news, sounds like a man celebrating a drug deal. But in reality, he was surviving. His laugh was nervous, faked in the moment. Because in his mind, the moment he stopped performing, the moment he showed fear, that's when these men would decide he was a liability. Better than gold wasn't celebration. It was survival instinct dressed up as excitement. The camera captured the costume, not the man inside it. Now, let's talk about the cocaine in that suitcase. That cocaine was seized at Van Nuys Airport at approximately 9 p.m. on the evening of October 18th. Legally, it became evidence in a federal drug case against Hetrick and Arrington, not against DeLorean. To remove evidence from the federal evidence system, you need a court order. That is not a formality. It is a legal requirement with a mandatory paper trail. Between the cocaine being sealed as evidence and DeLorean walking into room 501 on the 19th, no court order was ever sought or granted to release that cocaine. No documented chain of custody exists showing it moved from the evidence locker to the hotel room. What exactly does that mean? Tiza and Valestra never told me, so I don't know for certain if the coke in that suitcase was the real deal or not. But if that coke didn't get properly logged into evidence, that would be a criminal act that police officers can get prosecuted for, as obstruction of justice or official misconduct. We also don't know where the suitcase itself came from. It wasn't Arrington's suitcase, so whose was it? Did they fetch it from the hotel lost and found after their meeting? There is another possibility too. That Vicenza and Tiza did a last-minute assembly of powdered sugar, plastic bags, brown paper, masking tape, and blue felt-tip pen with the same RCX markings. And if that's the case, same deal. Obstruction of justice or official misconduct. Mishandling of evidence. At the 1984 trial, it came out that Agent Tiza had manipulated evidence connected to the case. I'm not going to tell you what to conclude. You can decide for yourself if we slapped handcuffs on DeLorean over a few kilos of powdered sugar. Back in room 501, Vicenza poured champagne. The room settled into something that felt like a celebration. "Here's to us," Vicenza said. DeLorean raised his glass. "And to a lot of success for everybody. And for all your phone calls. Thank you. Good luck to everybody."
DeLorean was grinning, not because he was celebrating a drug deal, but because for the first time he thought he might survive the day. The door opened. A new man entered the room. "Hi, John," he said. DeLorean looked up. "Hi." "Jerry West, I'm with the FBI. You're under arrest for narcotics laws violations." "This is Jose Aguilar. He's with the DEA." "Could you stand up, please?" "All right. I don't understand it. Turn around." West handcuffed him. DeLorean sat on the edge of the couch. West read him his Miranda rights, the full recitation, every sentence, the waiver form, the option to sign. DeLorean's answer? "I want to call my lawyer." "There's one more piece I want to put on the table before moving on." At DeLorean's 1984 trial, the United States government admitted that numerous secret documents regarding DeLorean had been exchanged between the FBI and the British government. Classified documents. DeLorean's defense requested access. The government refused. They cited national security. DeLorean could not understand how anything he had done, building cars, employing workers, trying to save a factory in Belfast, could possibly involve national security. Neither could his attorneys. The Thatcher-Reagan-Meese coordination was real. It was documented, and the documents are still hidden. Whatever those papers contain, the United States government decided it was better to invoke national security, to treat the prosecution of a car manufacturer as a matter of classified intelligence than to let anyone see what was in them. You don't hide documents that prove you did the right thing. After the arrest, the operation wasn't over. The FBI edited the video from room 501. They selected the moments that looked worst. The cocaine on the table, the laughter, the champagne toast, and released those clips to every network in the country. They did not release the moments where DeLorean talked about working capital and car sales, or the moment he said, "We haven't done that." Nothing that would complicate the story they wanted to tell. You don't just stage the scene, you control the distribution. You decide what the audience knows and what they never find out. And by the time DeLorean's attorneys could challenge any of it, the damage was done. The image was set. John DeLorean caught on camera in a drug deal. That was the publicity stunt, from beginning to end. The agents had saved their careers. They made front-page news. An operation that had been hemorrhaging money, spending millions of taxpayer dollars, suddenly looked like the most successful sting in American history. Despite the fact that my handlers couldn't act worth shit, we held it together. Just long enough to bring down the world's most famous automaker. Hetrick may have been the original target, but Hetrick couldn't make headlines. A drug smuggler getting arrested for drug smuggling doesn't lead the evening news. DeLorean did. He became the headline because headlines were what the operation needed. To justify the expense, to satisfy Meese, to give Thatcher the ending she'd been waiting for. Now, before you get all righteous on me, you gotta understand. DeLorean was doomed. The moment Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister. The moment Northern Ireland threatened her authority. Nothing that happened in room 501 was going to change that. The outcome was decided by people in offices in London and Washington, long before DeLorean sat with us in our microphones. Room 501 would be where John DeLorean would finally realize it was over. As for me, I was headed for witness protection. New name, new identity. Government stipend. That was always the deal. Deliver a big enough bust, and the government gives you a brand new life. It wouldn't all be wine and roses, though. Hetrick's sons and their vast network would be hunting me for the rest of my life. Say what you will. I held up my end.
So, there you have it. The plot, the setup, the scheme to take me down from start to finish. The FBI, the DEA, the receivers, Reagan, Meese, Thatcher, and Jim Hoffman. It reminded me of my days at GM. How Ed Cole and the corporate bean counters kept dismantling my efforts to make something special. It was always for their own greed, their own political power. There is no justice in the corporate world, and that's by design. This was what I got for pushing back against the Thatcher administration, challenging the British Empire. Because she couldn't let an automotive plant succeed in Northern Ireland. And because the FBI needed a celebrity bust for Reagan's war on drugs. Well, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I could still fight this. I was going to need a great lawyer. I had witnessed so much injustice and illegality in my life. And now, ironically, my life and my future were in the hands of the American legal system. It would take 3 years, but I would get my day in court and be found not guilty, thanks in no small part to testimony by Gerald Scotti, detailing the mishandling of evidence at the FBI and DEA and the absurd level of entrapment involved in my case. But the damage was still done. My reputation, my business, my marriage, my dream car, and my relationships with my children would never be the same. The lesson was clear. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.